That was beautiful. Thank you for that. And thank you for joining us, both those who are physically here and following us online. We appreciate your attendance. Let's get started continuing our studies on Joshua. Today we will cover Joshua chapter 5, not the entire chapter. We'll leave the last 3 verses for the next time around. So today we will cover verse 1 to verse 12 of Joshua chapter 5. Just to catch you up, in case you have not been here or totally forgot, even though you have been here, which happens every once in a while. I don't even know what I preached on the previous week. So the children of Israel have crossed the Jordan, and they've done the memorials, and now they are on the western shore. So they cross from east to west, and they are camped there and are preparing for battle, essentially. I mentioned a few dates last week. So here, what we have is in their calendar, it's the first month, and they crossed over on the 10th day of that first month, which is called Gilgal, the place is called Gilgal, the month is called Nisan. And on this 10th day of this first month of their calendar, which equates to our 4th month, they were to prepare something. They were to prepare for essentially the celebration of the Passover. So they were to set apart a lamb, and during these 4 days, they would prepare themselves, and on the 14th day of that month, they were to slaughter that little lamb as part of the sacrifice and the celebration of Passover. This was actually, as we will see here in this chapter, the 3rd time, technically, that they celebrated Passover. The first time was the main one, right? The second time was at Mount Sinai, and then they did not celebrate Passover for a period of 40 years while they were roaming around the desert, and now they get to do it once more and continue to do so hereafter. So this is basically the story of this particular occasion as, again, they are preparing to take over the Promised Land. So let's read from chapter 5, verse 1 to verse 12. And it says here, "So it was when all the kings of the Amorites who were on the west side of the Jordan, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan from before the children of Israel until we had crossed over, that their hearts melted. And there was no spirit in them any longer because of the children of Israel. At that time the Lord said to Joshua, 'Make flint knives for yourself, and circumcise the sons of Israel again the second time.' So Joshua made flint knives for himself and circumcised the sons of Israel at the hill of the foreskin. And this is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All the people who came out of Egypt, who were males, all the men of war, had died in the wilderness on the way, after they had come out of Egypt. For all the people who came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the wilderness on the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. For the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness, till all the people who were men of war came out of Egypt were consumed, because they did not obey the voice of the Lord, to whom the Lord swore that he would not show them the land which the Lord had sworn to their fathers that he would give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. Then Joshua circumcised their sons, whom he had raised up in their place, for they were uncircumcised, because they had not been circumcised on the way. So it was when they had finished circumcising all the people that they stayed in their place in the camp till they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "This day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you." Therefore, the name of the place is called Gilgal to this day. Now the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho. And they ate of the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day. Then the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the produce of the land. And the children of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate the food of the land of Canaan that year. So in verse 1, we have a reference that has been repeated several times. The demeanor, the feeling, the perspective of the people who were inhabiting the promised land prior to Israel taking over said land. They were fearing. Their hearts melted. It is the description that the spies received from Rahab. And also, it is a description of what was to come. If you look at the previous chapter, the last verse of the previous chapter, it's part of the intent of what they were doing. And on verse 24 of chapter 4, it says that all the peoples of the earth may know the hand of the Lord that is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. So it was something preordained, predetermined, that these people would receive this news, that would be aware of the things that were happening, and they would fear. Their hearts would melt. They would almost be paralyzed by the anxiety of something that was inevitable. And this was due to the fact that something miraculous happened, something unheard of, something that really you could not explain. This body of water that served as a natural barrier to protect them from the enemies coming from the east now did not protect them. And a whole people, an army, and an entire nation that has been roaming around the deserts now has passed through this body of water like it was a small little puddle. They had not experienced or seen this ever. They had not heard of anything around those areas. They heard of the stories of the Red Sea, and they heard of this God that was the God of these people, and now the story seems to be repeating, but now it is affecting them directly because the enemy is before them. And the children of Israel now are camped in Gilgal. We see in one of these verses, I believe verse 9 or 11, that the place was named Gilgal because the meaning of that term is rolled over, and God was rolling over the reproach, the punishment, the shame that had started when he disciplined them during the beginning of their trek to the promised land. And now again, they have established this beachhead of sorts. It's an idea, a military term, when someone tries to invade another territory, and you don't go straight into the capital. You don't go straight into where your enemy is most powerful, has the best ability to defend itself. All you want to do is to establish a beachhead. You want to go into a shoreline and protect that shoreline and have all your men there, and then slowly but surely you progress from that point. So Gilgal served as their beachhead. Now, as previously mentioned, if I was in charge, I would have just gone to battle. Why wait? We have seen what God has done up until this point. We want to catch them by surprise. We don't want to wait so that they elaborate some scheme to defend themselves. We don't give them time. Their hearts are melting. They are melted. Let's do it right away. Well, God had different plans. Part of the plan, as we saw in the story previously, was that they needed again to establish these monuments. These monuments that served as a reminder of something. And then also, besides that, they needed to set apart lambs. And now for 4 days, they were preparing for this blessed occasion, the Passover. Something that they had experienced and celebrated, but had not done so for a period of 40 years. But based on God's standards, based on God's decrees, there was something that needed to be done prior to the celebration of Passover. God had made a covenant with his people. And part of the showing of this covenant, part of the sign or the seal of this covenant was the fact that every male had to be circumcised. Now, raise your hand if you have no idea what circumcision is. Or you're not listening to what I'm saying. Good. One way or another, we're all good. We know what circumcision is. And here, it is an awkward situation. Why? Because a portion of the males had already been circumcised. And another portion had not been circumcised. So let me read to you the text from verse 2 to verse 8, where it kind of gives you the play-by-play of sorts of how this was happening. On verse 2 it says, "At the time the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives for yourself and circumcise the sons of Israel again the second time." Now, the reference of flint knives, these are knives, are sharp objects made out of stone. Very sharp. Has anybody ever made a knife out of stone? You've probably encountered, rocks and stones that might have chipped away at the edge, and you can tell that, it's pretty sharp, and one can cut himself a finger, but you wouldn't dare do surgery with that, would you? Would you want to do major surgery with that? You would not. But here, this is what they had. So they made these knives out of stone. And the reference here, again, as I've read, but I'll repeat, circumcise the sons of Israel again the second time. Now, this seems especially cruel. Come on. The first time is already hard enough, right? The second time? Like, what else is there to cut? Come on. The reference of second time, it doesn't mean that people who were already circumcised had to be circumcised again. The reference is now, as a people, they were going to be once again circumcised. If we think about the chronology of events that leads up to this point, more or less, this is what happens. The children of Israel, they are able to flee from Egypt under the leadership of Moses. We know what happens in the Red Sea. It parts, and they cross, and then they land in the area of Mount Sinai, where the Ten Commandments are received and given. They continue, and then the people start to sin. They start to bicker to the point where they get to this region where, and I've shown the map before, where Moses selects men from each tribe to enter into the promised land. It wasn't the same region that these people entered. It was a different region on the south. When they come back, the people are bickering. They do not want to follow through because they think they're going to be slaughtered. They actually attempt to kill the spies that brought forth good news, a positive account, namely Joshua and Caleb. God intervenes, and because of this and a couple other things, God decides to discipline that entire generation. Essentially, all of the adults would perish in the desert. And it took 40 years for that to happen. Well, so mathematically speaking, more or less, in that particular time in history, if you were 20 years or younger, you were saved. Why? Because God was going to punish the adults. God was going to punish the people who were in charge of that community within that particular generation. So if you were, let's say, 19 and a half or younger, you were still kind of considered a child of sorts. So you were not going to be punished. So you got to, roam around the desert thereafter. So those men who were 19 or younger, they actually were circumcised, roamed around the desert for 40 years, and now are here. So their age is more or less from 40 to 60 years old. You get the math? More or less? You get the idea? So these males that were from 40 to 60 years old, they had already been circumcised. However, the males that were from 39 and below, they had not been circumcised because during the desert wanderings, there was no circumcision needed or required. Why? There was a decree, a part of the law that stipulated that Passover could only be experienced, celebrated, the sacrifices could be done by those who had been circumcised. Why? Because circumcision was a sign. It was a seal of that covenant. If you did not have a sign or a seal of that covenant, you could not partake in Passover. That was true for the children of Israel, and it was true for any foreigner that wanted to take part and celebrate with them. They also needed to be circumcised. But again, since the celebration ceased to exist for a period of 40 years, there was no need for circumcision because, again, they were not going to celebrate it anyways. So a large portion of the male population had not been circumcised. And here we are. We've crossed the Jordan. We are in this particular time of the year, their first month on the 10th day, ready to partake in Passover on the 14th day of this month. What are they going to do? They are going to camp and they are going to be circumcised. Think about this. Ladies in the room, I know you who have children, went through pregnancies and actually labor, rather painful, I assume, I've heard. Not comfortable. It's amazing that you do it more than once, right? You go through all of that, and then you decide, hey, I forgot about it. Let me do it again. And some people, again, and again, and again. It's painful. There's a reason why men don't go through that. I don't think we are obviously genetically able to bear children, but the whole pain tolerance thing, I think women deal with that a little bit better than males. I think most people in the room and watching would agree. We're kind of babies. But here, I'm not trying to compare. There is no comparison. But there's a reason why kids are circumcised and not full-fledged grown men. As you might admit and agree, it's a very sensitive area, very delicate region of the male body. And here you are, using literally sharp stones. Can you imagine? Like how like is there like a huge line of males 39 and under? How do you figure out who's in the front of the line, right? Is it better to go first or last? You know, and these are a lot of men, right? And I'm sure it's not just one person performing these procedures. I'm sure they're all doing it in their own particular tents or whatever, right? Because it would be extra cruel. First of all, they don't have enough time for it to be just one huge line and then one person at the end doing it. But again, the person at the end, man, the anxiety. you're just hearing the screams, right? Because, you know, no way. There must have been like some manly men who just took it, right? And they're just like, you know, laughing at it. But there must have been other men who were just wailing and screaming like little girls. Very painful. Again, it's not a bruise. It's not a paper cut. You did not stub your toe. This is pretty major surgery for an adult male. And most of them were already adult males. And consider what they were doing. They were here preparing for battle. They were preparing for conquest. They were preparing to conquer the land. I would be sharpening my sword. I would be making sure that my shield was kind of sturdy. It wasn't going to like fall off my arm. I would be prepping my arrows and my spears. Maybe doing some calisthenics and push-ups so I look especially menacing to my enemies. Going over strategy, military ways, and again, battle strategies. But here they were, doing something very unconventional. They were literally putting themselves in harm's way. Because these men would not be able to fight off any enemies if they decided to charge them. They were harming themselves and would be sort of bedridden and unable to fight for a few days. Think of the trust that this needed. The faith that this required. Okay, God, I get it. You freed us. We crossed a couple of bodies of water. We roamed around for a while, but here we are. You've shown us over and over who you are and how you are. Do we need to do this? We get it. Yes, you do. So the story continues. Verse 3, so Joshua made flint knives for himself and circumcised the sons of Israel at the hill of the foreskin. Thank God it was at the hill, not the valley. And this is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All the people who came out of Egypt, who were males, all the men of war had died in the wilderness on the way after they had come out of Egypt. For all the people who came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the wilderness on the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. For the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness till all the people who were men of war came out of Egypt, were consumed because they did not obey the voice of the Lord. to whom the Lord swore that he would not show them the land which the Lord had sworn to their fathers that he would give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. Then Joshua circumcised their sons, whom he had raised up in their place, for they were uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. And now we transition to verse 8. This now gets to a point where T's are getting crossed and I's are getting dotted. There are certain things that God is finalizing. On verse 8 it says, so it was when they had finished circumcising all the people that they stayed in their places in the camp till they were healed. Again, it took several days for these men to be able to move around in a normal fashion, in a comfortable fashion. Then the Lord said to Joshua, this day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. Therefore, the name of the place is called Gilgal till this day. Egypt was part of their shame, their reproach. It was part of their dishonor. And now, in this very spot, in this date in history, God is rolling away. And the term means to be rolled away. No longer were they under this shame, this dishonor of being captives, of being slaves. Now they get to experience something new, something better, something that God had promised them a very long time ago. And now it is finally happening. Now, verse 10 says, the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho. And they ate of the produce of the land on the day after Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day. Then the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the produce of the land, and the children of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate the food of the land of Canaan that year. So again, God is crossing the T's and dotting the I's. There are certain details that still needed to happen. They still needed to experience certain things that were important. Part of that not only had to do with the celebration of Passover, but the seizing of the manna. At one point in time, as they were, on their way to the promised land originally, God provided for them. God provided for their physical needs in the form of manna, this thing that fell from the heavens and landed before the children of Israel. And they were to gather this thing that they had never seen before and could not describe. Consequently, they called it manna, which means, what is it? Do you know what that is? I don't know what that is. Have you seen that before? I have no idea. Let's call it manna. What is that? Apparently it was nutritious. It was enough for their survival. It was God saying, you will be punished, but I'm not a cruel God. I will still provide for your needs, for your necessities. Now, bear in mind, where were they going? They were going to the land of crackers? Were they going to the land of broccoli? If you don't like broccoli. Were they going to the land of whatever other type of food that you dislike? No. Flowing milk and honey. All the good stuff. And as they ate the manna, they were reminded, man, okay, God, this was good for a day or two or three, We are going to the land of milk and honey and all of this good stuff. And here, we just have to survive on... Can't you just bring over a little bit of milk and honey? Can this be a little tastier? Some variety? Maybe we can have manna Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. Sprinkle in a little milk and honey on weekends, right? Something else in between. Manna every single day. As a reminder that God was still protecting them, providing for them, but that they could have so much more. Again, God was providing still. That provision was supposed to be limited in time due to their sins. It extended for 40 years. But it served as this constant reminder. Man, we're missing out on something. There's something so much better out there. So much more. We're surviving, but we're not thriving. God has promised us a blessing that we are yet to experience, and all we're doing here is just waiting. Waiting for that blessed occasion. Notice the chronology of events here. So on the 14th day, they celebrate Passover. On the day after, as described, again, I'll read to you those verses. Now the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho. 11. And they ate of the produce of the land on the day after the Passover. So if the Passover is the 14th day of Nisan, which is their first month, our April, but their first month of their calendar, when did they eat of the produce of the land? 15. Simple math. Unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day. Verse 12. Then the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the produce of the land. When was that? On the 16th. Passover. 14th. Eating of the produce of the land. 15th. Apparently, it was overlapped with a little bit of manna as well. I don't know if anybody ate manna that day. Okay, that's it. But then on the following day, manna for the first time in decades ceased to fall from the heavens. Technically, once a week, it didn't fall because of the Sabbath, but you know what I mean. Ceased. And now they are being welcomed into a new reality. A better reality. No longer are they just in survival mode. No longer are they just being nourished, but not really enjoying. Now they get to enjoy the benefits of the promised land. The milk, the honey, the crops, the delicacies, all the things that they had been dreaming of. Now, finally, it's here. Coincidentally, ironically, if you fast forward through history, there came another Passover. They started celebrating Passover year in, year out, year in, year out, year in, year out. You know more or less their history. But there came this very special and important Passover. Jesus was born, full-fledged adult. Had a great week prior, by the way. Wonderful week. Was praised, was honored. Hosanna. And then on that 14th day of Nisan, Jesus and his disciples celebrated a Passover meal called the Last Supper. That's what they were doing. They were celebrating Passover. Then what happened during that day? Evening came. Jesus was arrested. Now the days, parentheses, it's kind of hard to follow based on our Western perspective of how our calendar works. We work with day starts at 12:01 or 12 and ends at 11:59 p.m. For the Jews, it's from daybreak till slightly before the next daybreak, right? So it overlaps 2 of our days. So bear in mind as we kind of are following the chronology of events here. Based on the way that they experience days and their calendar, Jesus had a Passover meal on the 14th day of Nisan, was arrested, tried, crucified, died, and was buried. And it all had to be done in a rush because the Sabbath was coming. So on the 14th day of Nisan, all of that happened. On the 15th day, God knows what happened. I don't know. Jesus was buried. He died. What happened on the 16th day of Nisan, 2 days after Passover? He rose from the dead. In a parallel fashion, in a symbolic way, this was a foreshadowing of what was to come. All of humanity eating manna, surviving, knowing what was to come, not really experiencing the plentiful aspects of this new covenant that God was providing for all of us. Then on the 16th day of Nisan, 2 days after, Jesus rises. And we get to experience the blessings of God and his new covenant in a complete and plentiful way. No longer are we just surviving. No longer are we just waiting. No longer are we just barely making it. Jesus' resurrection inaugurated something in our history that there is no parallel. There's a before and there's an after. We get to experience the blessings, the full-fledged blessings of God's new covenant for his people. That's what they were going through. And that's what we get to experience. And especially on the first Sunday of each month, we get to be reminded of this. We get to be reminded of Jesus' sacrifice. We get to be reminded of his death, his resurrection, the fact that he is the living, true bread from heaven, according to John. We get to be reminded that so many people throughout history would have loved to live and experience that. And it's in, chronologically speaking, it's in our past. It already occurred. Yet we get to continue living the benefits of this blessed day in history. 2 days after Passover, when the Lord rose. As we partake in communion, let's meditate and think about all the things that we're going through, that Jesus was going through with his disciples, all the promises that have already been realized, and those that are yet to come. The day when Jesus will come back and once again celebrate this meal with all of us. And until then, we await. We await this next great episode in history to experience the fullness of his blessings at another level. That's our greatest hope. Whatever we are going through right now, whatever we are experiencing, even though there are many blessings, there's so much more to come. We hopefully await for that day as we remember what Jesus did for us.